singing, adult singing women as a part of their culture. They were doing it. And among the means of entertainment, of course, they had the court jester. His job was to make the caliph laugh. He would come and tell jokes and do funny things. And along with them was the court scholar. The court scholar. They would have a couple of scholars there. One would be from the Hanafi madhab, and one would be from the Shafi'i madhab, because now these became the two most dominant schools. Hanbali madhab had almost disappeared. The Maliki madhab was restricted to certain areas. So Hanafi, Shafi'i were the main two madhabs. So he would have in his gathering a Hanafi scholar on one hand, Shafi'i scholar on the other. And a legal issue would be raised, and they would debate this issue. The Hanafi putting his evidences, arguing his point. The Shafi'i putting his evidence, offering his point. And whoever won the argument would be given a prize, a bag of gold, by the caliph. So, on one hand, what that started to develop was a rigid attitude towards the madhab. Because the court scholar, he would not want to lose the argument. He didn't want to lose the prize. So he would argue anyway, which way, you couldn't get him to back down. He would fight to tooth and nail to win his argument. He would employ Greek logic. He would take from any sources he could ways and means to argue his way out. So, the idea, my madhab, do or die, became a well-known saying. The idea of dishonoring the imam, to lose, to change your position meant dishonoring the imam of the madhab. This developed. To justify this rigid and fanatical clinging on to that madhab. What came out of it also was what they call speculative fiqh. Because as you can imagine, as the years went by, they ran out of real issues. Finished. You can only raise so many real issues, and you've covered them. Then what do you do after that? Then you start to bring in imaginary issues. What if? What if? So, you had coming out of that latter era a body of speculative fiqh, where the scholars of that time recorded in their books issues which would make the modern Muslim blush or laugh. For example, from the books of that time, I came across a book in Singapore. I went to Singapore to visit the Muslim Converts Association, give some lectures there. In the Muslim Converts Association, I asked to look at some of their literature. They gave me a book which was called The Teachings of Islam or something like this, some fundamental book which was explaining the basics of Islam, which they said, we give this to the new Muslim converts. Now this book was translated and prepared by Molvi, somebody or the other, from India. And he had translated texts from books from that era. So when you read the section on Tawheed, it is that it's what they call in the West gobbledygook. Gobbledygook means you just can't understand it. You read it, you can see the words, but what it means, Allah alone knows. His description of Tawheed was so confusing. In spite of my own studies, I couldn't understand what was said there. So I took it and I asked the brother, I said, what does this mean? They looked at it and said, we don't know either, really. I said, how can you give this to people to understand something so fundamental as Tawheed? This man was bringing all this Greek logical, expressions, all in Greek logic. Then as I went through, I found him discussing things which I also heard on other occasions. he was talking about, with a description, a chart, explaining which way should you wipe your behind in the winter and the summer. When you wipe your behind in the winter, you should do it in a counterclockwise way, and in the summer you should do it in a clockwise way. I looked at this and said, what? What is this? I had heard it elsewhere, so I wasn't fully surprised. I mean, that's the first time I saw it in writing. But when I traveled with the Jamaat Tabligh on one occasion, one of the scholars amongst them taught me that. I mean, I was doubtful about it then, and I realized, of course, later in my studies that it had no basis in the Quran and the Sunnah at all. But anyway, there it was in the book. But that wasn't so bad. When I came to the section on the things which break wudu, and they were listing the different acts which break wudu, they had there, the Mawzi had translated this, that wudu is broken if a man has sexual relations with a fish. And I said, what? What? I took this back to the brother and said, listen, you better get rid of this book. If any non-Muslim or new Muslim, somebody coming close to Islam, reads this, they're going to say, what in the world are Muslims about? What are they involved in? What kind of madness is this? But it is there in the book. And so as not just to put the finger on the Hanafis, let's go over to the Shafi'is. There was another book which written from that era, Shafi'i rulings, speculative rulings, and it said in it, if a man, this was an issue they discussed, passed wind into a paper bag. Why is passing wind into a paper bag? Of course, no explanation was given. But if he passed wind into a paper bag and he tied that bag, then he went and made wudu, then went back and undid the tie and released the wind from the bag, does he still have wudu or not? Well, such were the rulings from that era. Those are funny. We can look back at them and laugh. But there were other rulings which came especially after the fall of Baghdad. When Baghdad was destroyed by the Mongols, books were burnt, Muslims were massacred, scholars were killed, and those who came after them began to look at the madhabs in the most rigid way possible. Rulings were made that it was not permissible for a person to change from one madhab to the other. If he was caught changing, he could be lashed. He could be punished for changing from one madhab to the other. Furthermore, rulings came to say that it was not permissible for a Hanafi to marry a Shafi'i. Hanafis were not allowed to marry Shafi'is. Furthermore, nobody could pray behind anyone from another madhab. So the masjids had put in them two mihrabs in the areas where there were Shafi'is and Hanafis. For example, you will find in Damascus till this day, the main masjid in Damascus, it has a mihrab for the Hanafis, mihrab for the Shafi'is. Not only that, but around the Kaaba, the center of Islam, they built structures which they call, and you can find pictures, old pictures of the Haram before 1925, you'll see these structures there. They call it Maqam Hanafi, Maqam Shafi'i, Maqam Hanbali, Maqam Maliki. And what would happen? This structure, it looks like a sort of a little dome with legs, a place where the Imam could stand under it. What would happen is that when the time for Salah came, the Adhan was given, time for Salah came, people in the Kaaba, etc. The Hanafi Imam would go under the Maqam Hanafi, Iqamah would be given, and